The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Metropolitan General Hospital, casting a warm glow on the polished floors of the private wing. Elena Thorne moved with quiet efficiency, her soft-soled shoes barely making a sound as she adjusted the IV drip for her newest patient. At 32, Elena had become a fixture in the hospital, known for her unwavering compassion. She had lost her mother to a prolonged illness when she was just a teenager, an experience that had shaped her into someone who believed deeply in the healing power of kindness. Medicine could fix bodies, but it was empathy that mended souls. Today her charge was no ordinary patient. Marcus Hale, the billionaire CEO of Hale Industries, had been airlifted in after a high-speed car crash on the coastal highway. His sleek sports car had veered off the road, leaving him with a fractured leg, bruised ribs, and a concussion. The media was already buzzing outside, but he was just another person in need inside these walls. Elena entered the room, carrying a tray of fresh linens and a vase of wildflowers she had picked from the hospital garden. Their subtle scent softened the sterile air. Marcus lay propped up in the bed, his sharp features etched with pain and irritation. At 40, he was a man who commanded boardrooms and built empires, but his childhood had been marked by a tyrannical father who drilled into him that power was the only currency that mattered. Emotions were weaknesses to be suppressed, vulnerabilities to be hidden. Even now, semi-conscious, his jaw was set in defiance. "You are looking better this morning, Mr. Hale," Elena said gently, placing the flowers on the bedside table. "The color is returning to your face." Marcus opened his eyes, piercing gray orbs that fixed on her with surprise. He was not used to being addressed so casually. "Do you know who I am?" His voice was rough, laced with the authority that had closed multi-million-dollar deals. "You are Marcus Hale, a man who has been in an accident and needs rest," she replied calmly, checking his vital signs on the monitor. "Right now, that is all that matters." Something flickered in his expression, a mix of annoyance and intrigue. Most people fawned over him, seeking favors or connections, but this nurse, with her warm brown eyes and simple scrubs, showed no sign of awe or calculation. She adjusted his pillow with practiced care, her touch light but firm. The head nurse, Harriet, poked her head in the door, her lined face showing concern. "Elena, be careful. This one is demanding. He has already snapped at 3 assistants." Elena smiled softly. "Everyone deserves care when they are vulnerable, Harriet. Pain does not care about bank accounts." Harriet shook her head. "Your heart is too big for this job, child." Some see kindness as something to exploit. As Harriet left, Marcus watched Elena closely. "Why do you do this?" he asked, his tone less sharp. "Work long hours for strangers who might not even thank you." Elena paused, considering. "Because I have seen what happens when people face suffering alone. My mother passed away when I was young, and the nurses who cared for her made all the difference. Healing is not just about pills and procedures. It is about reminding someone that they are human and worthy of dignity." Marcus felt a pang in his chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome. His father had never spoken of dignity, only dominance. Growing up in a mansion that felt like a fortress, he had learned to build walls around his heart. Success had come easily, but a genuine connection had not. For the first time, he wondered if his empire was built on sand. Over the next few days, Elena's shifts became the highlight of his recovery. She did not defer to his status or cower from his occasional outbursts. Instead, she challenged him gently. As she reviewed his chart one afternoon, he complained about the hospital food. "This is inedible," he grumbled, pushing away the tray. Elena raised an eyebrow. "It is nutritious, but if you want something better, think about the volunteers who prepare it. They do it out of love, not for profit." "Philosophy from a nurse," Marcus said, amusement creeping into his voice for the first time. "Wisdom from someone who knows value is not always measured in dollars," she countered, replacing his wilting flowers with fresh ones. "These are from the garden, tended by people who understand beauty heals the spirit." Marcus studied her hands, noting the absence of rings or luxury. "No jewelry, no signs of wealth." "I do not need it," Elena said. "What I have is enough." That evening, as she prepared to leave, Marcus stopped her. "Wait, tell me more about your mother." Elena turned, surprised. She was strong, like you could be if you let go of control. "She taught me that true strength comes from sharing vulnerability." The words hit him like a wave. No one had ever suggested he could be vulnerable. His father had mocked tears, praised ruthlessness. But here, in this room, Elena saw through his facade. By the end of the week, Marcus anticipated her arrival. Their conversations deepened. He shared glimpses of his past, the pressure of inheriting a company at 25, the loneliness of decisions that affected thousands. Elena listened without judgment, sharing stories of patients who had overcome odds through resilience. "You built all this, but at what cost?" she asked one night, as the city lights twinkled outside. Marcus hesitated. "Regret is not in my vocabulary, but lately, I wonder." "It is never too late," Elena said. "Choices define us, but we can always choose differently." The next day, as discharge papers were prepared, Marcus felt a void. "Elena, would you have dinner with me? Just as two people, not a patient and a nurse." She tilted her head, eyes searching his. "Are you asking because you expect yes or genuinely want to know me?" "Just Marcus," he said quietly, "if you see something in me worth knowing." Elena paused, her mind racing. She had sworn off relationships after a painful breakup years ago, fearing she gave too much. Marcus represented everything she avoided: power, wealth, potential heartbreak. "I appreciate the offer, but it is best we keep this professional." His face fell, a rare crack in his composure. "Why?" "Because I have seen how power changes people, and I do not want to be another conquest." "It was not a conquest," he protested. "You have shown me something real." Elena smiled sadly. "Then prove it. Heal first. Find that fundamental part of yourself without needing someone to guide you." As she walked away, Marcus stared at the door stunned. No one had ever refused him. The rejection stung, but it also ignited something. For the first time, he questioned his life's path. Weeks passed. Marcus returned to his empire, but Elena's words haunted him. He canceled unnecessary meetings, visited the hospital garden she mentioned, and even donated anonymously to the pediatric wing. One evening, he appeared at the nurse's station with a bouquet of wildflowers. "Elena," he said, "I have been thinking about what you said. I want to prove I am more than my title." She looked up, surprised. "Mr. Hale." "Marcus, please." "Dinner?" "No expectations." Harriet watched from afar, whispering to a colleague. "That girl might change him." Elena hesitated, but saw sincerity in his eyes. "One dinner, to see if there is more." As they left together, the hospital buzzed with whispers, but Elena felt a spark of hope, tempered by caution. Little did she know, this was the beginning of a storm that would test everything she believed in. The weeks following their first dinner were a whirlwind for Elena Thorne. True to his word, Marcus Hale pursued her with a persistence that bordered on obsession, but a newfound humility tempered it. He sent flowers to the hospital, not extravagant bouquets from high-end florists, but simple arrangements reminiscent of her cherished hospital garden. He volunteered at the pediatric wing, awkwardly at first, reading stories to children with a voice that gradually softened from its usual commanding tone. Elena watched him from afar, her heart warring between caution and curiosity. She had built walls after her last relationship ended in betrayal. A man who had promised forever but left when life grew complicated. Marcus's vast wealth and influence seemed like a recipe for similar heartbreak. Yet, he surprised her. On their second date, he spoke about his father at a quiet Italian bistro overlooking the city. "He was a tyrant," Marcus confessed, his gray eyes distant. "He taught me that emotions are liabilities in business. I spent my life building walls, closing deals, and amassing power. But after the accident, after meeting you, I realized those walls have kept out more than just threats. They have kept out of life." Elena listened, her fork paused midway to her mouth. "And what do you want now?" "To tear them down," he said, "starting with you." She reached across the table, her hand covering his. "It will not be easy. Change like that takes time." "I have time," he replied, squeezing her fingers for the first time. Their romance bloomed like spring after a harsh winter. Marcus courted her with thoughtful gestures, picnics in the park where they discussed books on philosophy and human resilience, visits to art galleries where he admitted his ignorance and let her teach him. Elena, in turn, introduced him to her world. She took him to the soup kitchen where she volunteered on weekends, showing him the faces behind the statistics his company sometimes overlooked in pursuit of profit. One evening, as they served meals to people experiencing homelessness, a young mother thanked Elena for her kindness during a hospital stay. "You saved my boy," the woman said, tears in her eyes. Elena hugged her. "We all need saving sometimes." Marcus watched, a lump forming in his throat. Later, in the car, he turned to her. "You inspire me, Elena. I want to do more. Help me start a foundation for underprivileged families, medical care, and education." She smiled, her brown eyes sparkling. Together? Together. The Elena Thorne Foundation was born that month, funded by Marcus's resources, but guided by Elena's vision. It focused on holistic healing, providing medical aid and emotional support for families in crisis. Marcus found unexpected fulfillment in the work, and his boardroom sharpness redirected him toward meaningful change. For the first time, he felt like more than a conqueror, he felt like a contributor. As months passed, their bond deepened. Intimacy came naturally, passionate yet tender, each encounter revealing layers of vulnerability. Marcus shared nightmares from his childhood, the pressure to succeed at all costs. Elena confessed her fears of abandonment, rooted in her mother's death. They healed each other, or so it seemed. One crisp autumn evening, Marcus dropped to one knee under a canopy of stars in his sprawling estate garden. "Elena, you have shown me what real strength is. Not power over others, but power to love. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Marcus, yes." The wedding was a spectacle in a historic cathedral that echoed centuries of vows. Guests included business magnates, celebrities, and hospital staff, a blend of worlds symbolizing their union. Elena walked down the aisle in a flowing silk gown, embroidered with subtle floral patterns that nodded to her love of gardens. Her sister Clara, beaming as maid of honor, whispered encouragement. "You deserve this happiness." Marcus stood at the altar, his usual composure cracking with emotion. As Elena reached him, he took her hands, his voice steady but thick. "I, Marcus Hale, take you, Elena Thorne, to be my wife. I promise to cherish your spirit, protect your heart, and let your light guide me from the darkness I once knew." Elena responded, her voice clear. "I take you, Marcus, to love the man you are and the one you are becoming. I promise to be your anchor in storms, reminding you that true wealth is in connection, not conquest." The reception blurred into a night of toasts and dances. Marcus pulled her aside during a slow waltz. "You have changed everything," he murmured. "I never believed in forever until you." "Show me," she whispered, "every day." Their honeymoon in Italy was paradise. They wandered ancient ruins in Rome, savored gelato in Florence, and watched sunsets over the Amalfi Coast. Away from his empire, Marcus relaxed fully, laughing freely as they explored hidden coves. "I could live like this," he said one evening on their villa terrace. Elena curled against him. "We can bring this home," she replied. "Make it part of our lives." "You are right. We will build something lasting." But even in bliss, subtle shadows lingered. One night, as Elena slept, Marcus's phone buzzed with an urgent call from his office. He stepped outside, his voice low and tense. "Handle it quietly, no leaks." The call was from an old associate, reminding him of a shady deal from his past, one his father had orchestrated. "Loose ends," the voice warned. "Tie them up before they unravel everything." Marcus hung up, staring at the sea. His father's ghost loomed, whispering that vulnerability was weakness. He pushed it down, returned to bed, and held Elena close. But the seed of doubt was planted. Back home, married life seemed idyllic. Marcus balanced work with family time, consulting Elena on foundation decisions. She continued nursing part-time, finding joy in both worlds. Then, one rainy afternoon, Elena felt a wave of nausea. A pregnancy test confirmed it. They were expecting. She waited for him in their bedroom, the positive test in hand. When Marcus entered, her radiant smile said it all. "We are having a baby." He froze, then swept her into his arms, spinning her with laughter. "A baby! Our family!" They spent the evening planning. Names like Lily for a girl, a nursery with garden themes. Marcus's hands rested on her stomach, and there was wonder in his eyes. "I want to be the father I never had. Present. Loving." "You will be," she assured him, though his brief hesitation lingered in her mind. Was it joy or something else? As her belly grew, changes crept in. Marcus worked longer hours, citing the need to secure their future. Calls came at odd times, his tone sharper. Elena dismissed it as stress, but she intervened one evening as he paced during a heated conversation. "You are pushing too hard," she said softly. "I am providing," he snapped, then softened. "There is so much responsibility now, a wife, a child. I need to ensure we are safe." "We have enough," Elena reminded him. "We need you, not more wealth." "You do not understand," he said, pulling away. "You have never carried this weight." The words stung. She placed a hand on her belly, whispering to the baby, "It is just fear. Daddy loves us." But deep down, Elena wondered if the man she married was slipping back into old patterns, the pressure of legacy outweighing love. A quiet unease settled as she lay alone that night, staring at the ceiling. Their fairy tale was perfect, but perfection, she knew, could be fragile. The weeks after Elena's pregnancy announcement were filled with a fragile joy that shimmered like glass. Marcus smiled when she showed him the first sonogram picture, yet Elena saw the hesitation in his eyes. His hand lingered over the image but never settled, as though he wanted to touch hope without committing to it. She told herself it was stress from the empire he ran, the endless calls, the endless meetings, but deep down, she felt the thin crack forming. Marcus threw himself back into his work with the fervor of a man running from something. He had built his fortune on decisive moves and ruthless instincts. But Elena had glimpsed another side of him, softer, yearning for a family he never had. Yet that softer side began to retreat. Victoria Lang slid into his orbit at one of the late-night conferences. She was everything sharp and gleaming, raven hair, an ambitious smile that promised power and pleasure. She told Marcus he did not need to change for anyone. She laughed at the notion of compromise, praising his dominance in boardrooms and his reputation as a man who could bend the world to his will. With Victoria, Marcus felt the echo of his father's voice, telling him power was the only form of safety. Elena, meanwhile, wrote in her journal at night, resting a hand on her growing stomach. Her entries became filled with questions. Was she selfish for believing Marcus could change? Had she forced him into a mold he could never fit? She reminded herself that love meant faith. But doubt began to crawl into her words, staining each page. When Marcus told her he had to attend a client dinner, Elena smiled and kissed him goodbye, trying to ignore the cold unease inside her. That evening, she cooked pasta, humming softly to herself, imagining telling him about baby names when he returned. But her phone buzzed with a message from Harriet. Harriet had seen a photo online, a leaked snapshot from a luxury rooftop party. Marcus was there, drink in hand, his arm draped over Victoria's shoulder. They looked intimate, caught mid-laugh, the skyline glowing behind them. Elena stared at the image until her vision blurred. She told herself it must be a business gathering, that the photo was misleading, that Marcus would never betray the vows they had made under the Tuscan sun. But the ache in her chest whispered otherwise. When Marcus returned past midnight, Elena was still awake on the couch. He smelled faintly of perfume, one that was not hers. He babbled about the meeting, investors, strategy, and how everything depended on him. She nodded, silent, hiding the storm raging inside. He kissed her forehead and retreated to the shower. Alone, Elena touched her belly and whispered to her unborn child. She promised Lily, though she had not yet chosen the name. that she would always be there, no matter what storms came. Her tears slid silently down her cheeks, soaking into the pages of her journal. The following week, Marcus grew more distant. His phone was always face down on the desk. He claimed exhaustion when she suggested walks in the park. He spent nights in his office, making calls with international partners. Elena's intuition screamed louder each day, but she buried it beneath her duties at the hospital. Patients needed her. Harriet relied on her, and Clara called often to check in. She had no space left for despair. Yet, despair found its way in. One evening, while organizing files in her office at the hospital, she overheard two nurses whispering about Marcus. They had read articles about his closeness with Victoria Lang, the businesswoman whose rise was as fast as it was ruthless. Elena's hands froze on the folders. She smiled tightly at the nurses, pretending not to care, then locked herself in the staff bathroom and stared at her reflection. She barely recognized the pale, weary woman gazing back. At home, she confronted Marcus gently, not with accusations, but with concern. She asked if he was under pressure, felt trapped, or if there was anything she could do. He brushed her off with a laugh, pulling her into a brief embrace that felt more like a performance than affection. He assured her she was imagining things. He told her he loved her, then left for another late meeting. Elena returned to her journal that night. She wrote about love that felt like smoke, impossible to hold, no matter how tightly one tried. She wrote about fear, about the legacy of her mother, who had raised her with nothing but tenderness and truth. She wondered if she had chosen a man who could not understand either. Days later, the truth sharpened. Clara called her one morning, her voice heavy. She told Elena she had seen Marcus and Victoria together at a charity gala, whispering like conspirators. Clara had wanted to storm over, to defend her sister's honor, but she held back, not wanting to create a public scandal. Elena thanked her quietly and ended the call. Her hand trembled as she held her phone. She knew Clara's words were not gossip. Clara would never lie. That night, Marcus came home with lipstick faintly smudged near his collar. Elena said nothing. She stared, her silence louder than any accusation. Marcus noticed, hesitated, then muttered about long meetings and exhaustion. As he slept beside her, Elena lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Every breath he took sounded foreign, distant, as though the man she had once trusted with her whole heart was already gone. She thought of the vows they had made, of the man who had once looked into her eyes with tears as he promised to change. She thought of how he held her hand during the first ultrasound, and she thought of the photograph, of Victoria's triumphant smile. Her chest tightened with grief, yet beneath the grief was a spark of resolve. She would not let betrayal define her or allow her child to grow up in a house where lies were the foundation. The chapter closed with Elena standing at the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Behind her, Marcus stirred, unaware that his world was on the brink of collapse. Elena pressed her hand against her belly, whispering a vow stronger than any wedding promise. She and her child would survive, no matter the cost. And then her phone buzzed with another notification. Another photograph. Marcus and Victoria, this time closer, his hand lingering at her waist, his eyes alight with something Elena had not seen in months. The screen went black in her trembling hand. She turned off the phone, tears streaking down her cheeks. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was true. Elena inhaled sharply, feeling both devastation and clarity. The life she had fought to build was crumbling, but her strength was awakening. The night was silent except for her whisper, a promise to herself. She would face the storm and not break. The night began with sharp waves of pain that jolted Elena from her uneasy sleep. She clutched the edge of the bed, her breath ragged, her heart pounding as she realized the contractions had begun. The room was dim, the city lights flickering through the curtains, and she was utterly alone. Panic rushed through her veins as she reached for her phone. With trembling fingers, she dialed Marcus. It rang once, twice, 3 times before the line went dead. She tried again, desperation sharpening her voice when the voicemail tone sounded. "Marcus, please, it is time I need you. I cannot do this alone." Her words broke into sobs as she pressed the phone against her ear, waiting for a reply that never came. At that very moment, Marcus was in Victoria's apartment, his phone discarded on the table, silence to avoid interruption. Victoria poured him a glass of wine, her smile wicked as she leaned close, whispering about the power they could seize together. The city skyline stretched beyond her windows, a glittering promise of ambition. Marcus, caught between guilt and the intoxication of control, ignored the buzzing device that held his wife's desperate plea. Back in the apartment, Elena doubled over, clutching her belly as another contraction struck like a lightning bolt. She managed to call Clara, who answered in a rush of concern. "Clara, I am in labor," she gasped. "I cannot reach Marcus." Clara's voice tightened, but she promised to meet her at the hospital. Harriet, too, was alerted and immediately began preparing a room. The taxi ride was a blur of agony and fear. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, whispering to the life inside her, "Hold on, my love, we are almost there." She remembered her mother's voice from childhood, soft and steady even in hardship. Her mother had told her that strength was not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving despite it. At the hospital, bright lights and hurried footsteps surrounded her. Harriet took charge, her calm voice guiding Elena through the storm. "You are safe here, Elena. You are not alone." But inside Elena's heart, the absence of Marcus burned like a wound. She had imagined him by her side, holding her hand, whispering encouragement. Instead, she gritted her teeth, gripping the rails of the bed as waves of pain crashed over her. Dr. Alexander Voss arrived quickly, his presence steady and reassuring. He adjusted the monitors, offered her words of calm, and stayed by her side when the fear threatened to overwhelm her. "Focus on breathing, Elena," he urged gently. "You are stronger than you think." She clung to his words, drawing strength from his certainty. The hours stretched endlessly. Sweat dampened her hair, her cries filled the sterile room, and yet she found a reservoir of resilience she had not known existed. With Harriet's guiding hands and Alexander's steady voice, she pushed through the agony until finally the sound of a newborn's cry shattered the silence. Elena's tears flowed freely as the nurse placed the tiny, fragile bundle on her chest. Lily's cries softened as Elena whispered to her, pressing her lips against the baby's downy forehead. "You are my everything," she breathed. "You are my reason to keep going." Joy and sorrow intertwined that moment, and Lily's first breath confirmed Marcus's ultimate betrayal. When Marcus finally noticed the string of missed calls and voicemails hours later, his heart seized with panic. He rushed to the hospital, his mind a whirlwind of guilt and dread. But when he arrived, it was too late. Elena had already closed the door to him, both literally and emotionally. Harriet stood outside the room, her eyes cold as steel. She told him Elena and the baby were safe, but she also told him the truth. "She did it without you. She did not need you." Marcus pressed his forehead to the nursery's glass, staring at the tiny infant inside. His chest constricted with something he had never felt before, a crushing sense of loss that no fortune could repair. He knocked softly at Elena's door, whispering her name, but there was no answer. Inside, Elena sat upright, Lily nestled against her, her eyes fixed on the newborn with fierce devotion. She had left him a voicemail during labor, her voice raw with desperation. When Marcus finally listened to it, the sound broke him. Elena's words, "I cannot do this alone, Marcus, please, where are you?" echoed in his mind like a haunting refrain. He sank onto a bench in the corridor, his head in his hands, consumed by the weight of what he had done. Elena's exhaustion gave way to a heavy stillness as she cradled Lily. Clara entered quietly, her expression torn between anger and compassion. "Marcus is here," she said softly. "Do you want to see him?" She shook her head firmly. "Not now. Maybe not ever." Clara nodded, understanding. When Alexander checked in later, Elena thanked him with a tired smile. "You were there when I needed someone most," she said. His reply was quiet. "That is my duty, but it is also my honor." Their eyes met for a brief moment, a connection forming in the silence, though neither of them dared to name it. Marcus waited in the hallway for hours, hoping for forgiveness, but Elena did not open the door. His world of power and control suddenly felt fragile, crumbling under the weight of choices he could no longer take back. He had lost the moment that mattered most, and the image of Elena clutching their daughter without him seared into his memory. As dawn broke over the city, Elena whispered promises to Lily. vowing she would never know abandonment, never feel the sting of being unwanted. Her love would be unbreakable, fierce enough to withstand any storm. In her arms, Lily stirred softly, her tiny hand curling around Elena's finger. That single touch reminded Elena of everything she still had worth fighting for. Outside the hospital, Marcus stood alone in the cold morning air. His car waited, his empire remained intact, but none mattered. He had traded presence for ambition, love for illusion, and now he faced the hollow echo of his choices. He wanted to run back inside, to beg Elena for another chance, but he knew the door was closed. Victoria called him, her voice laced with irritation. "Where were you last night, Marcus? You missed the meeting." But Marcus barely listened. His daughter's cry from behind the nursery glass lingered louder than Victoria's ambition. For the first time in years, Marcus Hale felt powerless. Elena drifted into an exhausted sleep in her room, and Lily rested against her. Before surrendering to dreams, her final thought was not of Marcus, betrayal, or strength. She had faced the storm alone and survived. And now she was more than a wife abandoned by a man who could not love her as she deserved. She was a mother, unbreakable, her heart tethered to a future she would shape with her own hands. The night had ended in pain and abandonment, but the dawn arrived with hope. Elena and Lily were bound together, two souls who would rise above betrayal. And though Marcus lingered in the shadows of regret, Elena knew her path was already changing. She had crossed a threshold, one that no apology could undo. As sunlight spilled across the room, bathing mother and child in warmth, Elena whispered again, "We are enough, Lily. We will always be enough." The hospital room had quieted after a long night of exhaustion and fragile joy. Elena sat propped against the pillows, Lily nestled close against her chest, the soft rhythm of her newborn's breathing soothing the ache that lingered in her body. The world outside the window seemed distant, the hum of traffic muted by the thick hospital glass. She had survived the hardest night of her life, yet a shadow still lingered in her heart. Marcus had not been there. Harriet entered with her usual steady presence, checking the monitors and tidying the space with efficient motions. She gave Elena a glance filled with unspoken sympathy. "He came by," she said at last. "He waited in the corridor, but you were resting. Do you want me to let him in?" Elena's jaw tightened, her eyes falling to Lily. "Not now, not until I can look at him without breaking." Later that afternoon, a sudden chill entered the room as visitors came and went. Victoria Lang swept in with her designer heels clicking against the tile, her perfume too strong, her smile too sharp. She ignored Harriet's frown at the intrusion and fixed her gaze on Elena. "So this is the famous child," Victoria said, her voice dripping with disdain. "The daughter of a nurse who thought she could turn a billionaire into a family man." Elena's heart clenched, but she held Lily closer, unwilling to let this woman see her fear. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with steel. "I came to tell you the truth," Victoria said, leaning against the bedrail with casual cruelty. "Marcus never belonged to you. He is mine. He always returns to me because I give him what he wants. Power, ambition. Not this pathetic little life you tried to trap him with." Harriet stepped forward, her voice sharp. "That is enough, Miss Lang. You have no right to be here." But Elena raised a hand, silencing Harriet. She wanted to hear every word, no matter how much it hurt. She needed the truth carved into her skin, never to deny it again. Victoria smirked, enjoying the moment. "Last night, while you were here screaming for him, he was with me. He chose me over you, and over that child. That is the man you married." The words pierced Elena like shards of glass. She felt her throat tighten, her vision blur, but she did not cry. Instead, she drew Lily closer, pressing her lips to her daughter's head, as though shielding her from the poison spilling into the room. Dr. Alexander Voss entered at that moment, his brows furrowed at the scene. "What is happening here?" he demanded. Victoria straightened her posture, feigning innocence and just paying my respects. Then, with a final cutting glance at Elena, she turned and left, her heels echoing down the corridor. The silence she left behind was heavy. Alexander moved to Elena's side, his voice soft. "Do not let her words wound you. They are meant only to break your spirit." "But they are true," Elena whispered, tears finally sliding down her cheeks. He was not there, Alexander. I begged for him, and he chose her. Alexander's eyes softened with grief, his memories flickering back to his own past. I lost my wife to illness, he said quietly. I know what it is to feel powerless, to want someone beside you and find only emptiness. But you are not impotent, Elena. You brought your daughter into the world with nothing but your own strength. That is something no betrayal can erase. His words steadied her, but they could not erase the pain. When Clara arrived later with papers in her hand, her voice firm, Elena felt the course of her future shift. These are divorce documents, Clara said. It is time you protect yourself and your child. Elena hesitated, staring at the papers, her heart heavy with the weight of endings. Yet deep inside, she knew her sister was right. That evening, Marcus finally entered, his eyes hollow from lack of sleep. Elena sat upright, Lily in her arms, and Clara stood protectively nearby. The tension in the room was palpable as Marcus approached, his voice hoarse. Elena, please, let me explain. Explain, Elena repeated, her voice trembling, not with weakness, but with fury. Explain how I screamed for you while our daughter was entering this world. Explain how Victoria stood in this room and told me where you were. Marcus flinched, shame twisting his features. It was a mistake. I never meant for it to go so far. I love you, Elena. I love our daughter. You love yourself, Elena snapped. You love your empire. You love the power she feeds you. But you only loved the idea of me, the idea that I could make you whole. I cannot fix a man who refuses to change. Marcus stepped closer, desperation in his eyes. Please, do not do this. I can be better. I can change. Elena shook her head, her tears falling freely now. You already showed me who you are, and last night you proved it beyond doubt. Their voices rose, the confrontation raw and unfiltered. Marcus shouted about the pressure he carried, the legacy of his father's impossible demands, the fear of losing control. He confessed he had sought escape in Victoria, because with her, he could be the ruthless man he thought he was meant to be. And with me, Elena asked, her voice breaking. With you, I was vulnerable, he admitted. With you, I felt like the boy I used to be, the boy my father despised, and I hated it. The admission struck Elena harder than any denial. She realized then that Marcus had never seen her as a partner, only as a mirror reflecting parts of himself he could not bear to face. Clara intervened, her tone sharp. Enough. Elena does not owe you forgiveness. You signed your own betrayal. Marcus's gaze dropped to Lily, his expression filled with longing and regret. May I hold her? He whispered. Elena tightened her grip, shaking her head. Not today. Not after what you have done. The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus stood there, shattered, while Elena turned away, her body shielding Lily as though from a storm. Alexander returned, his presence steady, and Marcus saw what he had lost in that moment. Another man standing where he should have been, another man offering the strength and compassion he had failed to give. Marcus left the room defeated, his footsteps heavy with regret. In the corridor, he pressed his back against the wall, his chest heaving as the weight of his choices crashed down. For the first time in his life, Marcus Hale felt truly powerless. Inside the room, Elena exhaled shakily, kissing Lily's forehead. She whispered to her daughter words Marcus would never hear. We are safe now. We are strong enough without him. Clara squeezed her sister's hand, and Alexander adjusted the monitors in quiet solidarity. Elena felt a fragile thread of hope weaving through her grief. She had faced the truth. She had confronted the man who betrayed her. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. She was no longer bound to Marcus's shadow. As night settled over the hospital, Elena opened her journal once more. She wrote with steady hands, not of despair but of resolve. Tonight I begin again. Tonight I claim my life back. Tonight I choose strength over betrayal. And with Lily sleeping soundly in her arms, Elena closed the book, her heart heavy but determined. The storm had come and gone, leaving ruins in its wake. But from those ruins, she would build something new, something unbreakable. The morning broke heavy with clouds pressing low over the horizon, as if the sky carried the same weight that burdened Matthew's heart. He woke restless from a night of broken dreams, where the clatter of chains and the cries of unseen beasts chased him through endless corridors. The reality he faced was no less haunting. His reputation had not recovered, despite the whispers of doubt beginning to stir around town. For every person who considered his innocence, two clung to the story of his guilt. The horse remained his one light source in the gathering gloom, yet even that bond was now threatened. He walked to the stable with shoulders squared, determined to protect the creature, no matter the cost. The great horse greeted him with a rumble from deep in its chest, eyes bright with recognition. Matthew pressed his forehead against the horse's muzzle, and for a moment, he found silence. He whispered promises into the coarse hair, vowing to keep him safe against all who might come. But even as he spoke, he knew that promise would soon be tested. Word had spread of men in town who sought to claim the horse as property, or worse, to rid themselves of what they called a dangerous beast. That morning, Sheriff Daniels arrived at the farm, accompanied by 2 deputies. The sight of them sent a cold ripple through Matthew's veins. The sheriff was not cruel, but he was bound to the law and the pressure of townsfolk. He dismounted slowly, his eyes shifting from Matthew to the horse with measured calculation. Matthew asked him to state his purpose, but the sheriff delayed answering. Instead, he approached the animal, as if considering the danger written into its size. Only then did he say there had been petitions for removing the horse. Some claimed it posed a threat. Others argued it could be evidence tied to Matthew's supposed crimes. Matthew's voice cracked with restrained fury as he told them the horse had harmed no one. He pleaded for time to prove not only his innocence, but also the worth of the animal. The sheriff hesitated, clearly torn between duty and compassion. He finally agreed to grant Matthew a week, no more. If no evidence emerged, the horse would be taken. The days that followed stretched like a taut rope. Matthew rose each morning with resolve, but was met with obstacles at every turn. The neighbors who once greeted him warmly now avoided his gaze. Old friends muttered excuses when he sought their help. Even the pastor whose sermons once spoke of forgiveness seemed reluctant to intervene. He felt himself slowly pushed into isolation. Only the horse and the few loyal souls believed he offered him strength. Among those few was Anna, a schoolteacher whose quiet presence masked a fierce sense of justice. She visited often, bringing food and words of encouragement. She reminded him that truth, though hidden beneath lies, had a way of rising. Her faith stirred something in Matthew that he thought long lost. Yet doubt gnawed at him as each day passed without discovery. One evening, as the sun bled red across the fields, Matthew took the horse into the meadow. The creature moved with powerful grace, its strides shaking the earth. As Matthew watched, he saw more than an animal. He saw a reflection of his struggle, strength bound in chains of suspicion, longing for release. He realized then that his fight was not only for his own name, but for the right of all creatures, innocent yet condemned by fear. That night, storms gathered. Rain lashed the land as winds screamed through the trees. Matthew barely managed to secure the stable when a knock thundered against his door. Standing drenched on his porch was Thomas, the blacksmith, who had once accused him most loudly. His face carried a strange urgency. He told Matthew he had seen men creeping near the property with ropes and blades, planning to take the horse by force. Without hesitation, Matthew armed himself with nothing more than a lantern and courage. Together, he and Thomas braved the storm, rushing to the stable. Lightning split the sky, revealing shadows of intruders circling like wolves. Matthew shouted in defiance, the sound drowned by thunder. The men surged forward, but the horse rose, roaring into the tempest. Fear gripped the intruders who fled into the night, leaving only the echo of hooves and the pounding rain. In the aftermath, Matthew stood trembling, soaked to the bone. The horse pressed close as if shielding him. Thomas remained silent, eyes wide with awe. In that moment, some unspoken truth passed between them. The blacksmith perhaps realized for the first time that Matthew's bond with the horse was not the mark of guilt, but loyalty and trust. He apologized, stumbling over words he never thought to say. Though forgiveness would take time, Matthew accepted his help. He knew alliances, however fragile, might be his only salvation. The following day, whispers spread of the stormy confrontation. Some mocked the tale, but others began to question their certainty. Why would guilty men risk themselves for a beast if not to silence what it might reveal? The tide of suspicion shifted slightly, though the week granted by the sheriff was nearly gone. Matthew's desperation sharpened into clarity. If he did not act now, his freedom and the horse's life would be lost. He turned to the journals left behind by his late father, who had once worked with horses of great lineage. Leafing through the worn pages, he discovered entries describing strange markings and brands used by traveling traders long forgotten. With Anna's help, he deciphered symbols hidden in plain sight, upon the horse's flank beneath layers of grime and healed scars. These marks pointed not to theft or crime, but to a story of abandonment. The horse had once been part of a caravan that vanished during a storm years earlier. Survivors had scattered, never reclaiming what was lost. Armed with this revelation, Matthew sought the sheriff. He presented the evidence with trembling hands, explaining each connection. The sheriff listened, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he admitted the truth was compelling, though not yet absolute. Still, it was enough to grant reprieve and to stay the hand of those who demanded removal. Matthew breathed a sigh of relief, yet knew his battle was far from over. His struggle with the town and within himself reached the breaking point. He could no longer live quietly, waiting for others to decide his fate. He resolved to seek out the remnants of the caravan, to uncover the whole truth of the horse's past. It was a dangerous path that might draw him far from safety, but the alternative was surrender. As dawn lifted over rain-soaked fields, Matthew saddled the horse for the first true ride. The creature stood tall, muscles taut with energy as if sensing the journey ahead. Anna watched from the fence, her eyes filled with worry and pride. Thomas offered a nod of support, the weight of his earlier betrayal not yet erased but softened by new understanding. With a final glance at the farm, Matthew urged the horse forward. The hooves struck the earth with thunderous rhythm, carrying him into the unknown. He did not know what awaited, perhaps more accusations, maybe redemption. But he felt the stir of hope, like a flame refusing to die. The breaking point had not shattered him. It had forged him into a stronger man who would not bow to fear nor abandon the innocent creature entrusted to him. The road stretched long ahead, winding into mist and shadow, yet also promise. Matthew knew the journey had only begun and that every step would test his resolve. Still, he pressed onward, unyielding, his heart bound to the great horse that ran beside him into the rising light. The days after the confrontation in the hospital lingered between silence and storm for Marcus Hale. He moved through his world like a man unmoored, each step heavier than the last. The corridors of his penthouse felt hollow, and the voices of the boardrooms were distant echoes. In place of ambition now stood a gnawing emptiness that no business victory could fill. His empire, once a fortress, now seemed like a gilded cage. Victoria Lang remained at his side, her presence both a comfort and a curse. She carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had won her prize. Yet Marcus began to notice fissures in her smile. She no longer looked at him with the same unyielding admiration. Instead, her eyes held calculating, as if she weighed his usefulness against her ambition. It was a late evening in her high-rise apartment that the truth crystallized. They had attended a gala for a new venture, the air thick with champagne and applause. Victoria lingered beside him, her perfume heavy in the charged atmosphere. Later, she drew him away into a quiet corner, her voice low. "You have become weaker," she said. "You look like a man who has lost his way." Marcus felt a cold stab of shame. "I am not weaker," he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "No," she said, smiling faintly. "You are weaker because you lost her. Elena was everything you wanted, and you let her slip away. Now you cling to me for control and validation. But what happens when I take that away from you?" The words stayed with Marcus long after the gala lights dimmed. That night, he could not sleep. He thought of Elena cradling Lily, of her gaze unbroken by his absence, of the quiet dignity with which she had rejected him. Guilt pressed him like a stone, heavier than any contract or conquest. He realized that Victoria was no longer an ally, but a tether to a life he had chosen to abandon. Her ambition no longer inspired him, it imprisoned him. By her side, he was losing not only Elena, but himself. Marcus called Victoria the next morning. His voice was different, less specific, almost pleading. "We need to end this." Her laughter was sharp, almost cruel. "You think you can walk away, Marcus? You think you can erase what we built? Do not fool yourself. You need me as much as I need you." But Marcus no longer agreed. Over the following weeks, he began withdrawing from their meetings and shared ventures. Victoria noticed, and her patience frayed. She confronted him one evening in his office. "You cannot hide from me," he said. "You cannot take back what you gave." "I do not want to hide anymore," Marcus said. "I like the truth, and I want peace." Victoria's expression hardened. "Then you will lose everything. Everything you think matters." Her words were a prophecy Marcus could not ignore. Within days, rumors spread of their split. Board members questioned his judgment. Investors hesitated. Contracts slipped through his fingers. His name became a caution in whispered conversations. Marcus was losing more than Victoria, he was losing power itself. And yet beneath it all was an awakening. He no longer cared for the trophies of his life as he once did. What haunted him most was the image of Elena's face in the hospital. The way she had held their child without him, and the echo of her voice telling him she did not need him. The weeks grew heavy with solitude. Marcus found himself wandering the city at night, drawn to places that reminded him of Elena and the life he had let slip away. He found her favorite cafe, sat at the corner table where she had once laughed over coffee, and watched couples pass hand in hand. Each step, each breath felt like a measure of what he had lost. Victoria tried to pull him back, offering deals, alliances, promises of a return to the heights they had conquered, but Marcus turned away. One evening, she cornered him after a meeting, her eyes sharp with anger. "You are throwing away everything we worked for." "I am reclaiming myself," he replied. "I cannot stand in a house built on lies." The end came quietly. Marcus summoned Victoria to his office and told her their partnership was over. She stared at him with disbelief, her voice trembling between fury and incredulity. "You will regret this," he said. She smiled then, but it was not a smile of affection. It was a smile of challenge. Marcus left the office without looking back. He knew she would try to fight him in every way possible, but he had made his choice. He would no longer be defined by ambition at the cost of truth. His thoughts always turned to Elena. He knew she had moved on with her life, that Alexander stood beside her, offering the strength he could not. He had glimpsed the truth that what he had lost was not just a wife or a child, but the very part of himself capable of love without conditions. Marcus began to dismantle the empire he had built around himself. He sold properties, stepped back from ventures, and withdrew from the public eye. The whispers followed him, but he no longer tried to silence them. He accepted the consequence of his actions, carrying the weight of regret as a constant companion. One rainy evening, he found himself standing outside the hospital. He did not enter. He watched through the glass as Elena moved gracefully with Lily in her arms. She laughed softly at something Alexander had said, her face illuminated with warmth Marcus knew he could never reclaim. His chest tightened with longing. He turned away, rain soaking through his coat, and walked into the night. The streets were empty, the city hushed as if holding its breath. For the first time, he understood that power was nothing without the heart to wield it. In the following weeks, Marcus withdrew further from the world he had known. Victoria became a memory, a lesson in the cost of desire. His regrets became a quiet ache he carried alone. He made no public statements, offered no explanations. He lived in silence. He only broke it when he wrote a letter to Elena. He did not send it. In it, he confessed his faults, the fear that had driven him away, and the truth that he had been too proud to admit. He wrote of love and loss, of the child he would never cradle, and the life he had abandoned. When he read those words later, he folded them carefully and placed them in a drawer. The letter was not for her. It was for himself. A confession to close a chapter he could no longer rewrite. Marcus Hale had ended the affair with the woman who had promised him the world, only to find it empty. In losing Victoria, he had lost ambition, but gained something more elusive. He had lost himself, and perhaps, in that loss, he had begun to find who he truly was. The city moved around him, but Marcus remained still, standing at the edge of his story. He knew that the path before him was uncertain. There was no redemption to claim, no love to reclaim. Only the quiet truth of a man who had loved and betrayed and learned too late what it meant to hold on. And in that quiet, he understood the final cost of his choices. The air was soft with the scent of autumn, as Elena walked through the garden courtyard of the small hospital she now called her own. Lily toddled at her side, her small fingers wrapped around hers. The morning sun filtered through amber leaves, casting a warm glow that seemed almost impossible after the storms of recent months. Elena moved with a quiet determination. The world was no longer hers to fear, it was hers to build. Alexander Voss watched her from a distance, his presence gentle yet unwavering. He had come early that day, as he often did, before the hospital filled with its usual hum of life. He followed her steps with the careful attention of a man who cherished every detail of her existence. His heart had grown heavy with an affection he dared not rush, knowing that trust took time to rebuild. They walked together through the small garden, the air between them carrying unspoken words. Finally, Alexander spoke softly. "Elena, you have given more of yourself in these months than anyone I have ever known. You have built something extraordinary from the fragments of pain." Elena glanced at him, a quiet smile touching her lips. "I am not done yet," she said. "There is still so much to do." He nodded, his eyes lingering on her face as though memorizing it. Then he stopped and took both of her hands in his. Elena felt a flutter of unease mixed with something tender. "Alexander, I have something to ask you." Her brow lifted in gentle surprise. His voice softened. "Elena, I want to build a life with you and Lily. I want to be there for every step, every moment. Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air, carrying more weight than the simple words could contain. Elena's breath caught. Her mind raced with memories of the past year, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the nights of loneliness, and now this moment of promise. She looked into his eyes and saw something she had not dared to hope for, a sincerity not bound by power or ambition, but by something far more profound. "I do not know," she whispered. "I have been afraid, not because I do not want to, afraid of opening my heart again, fearful of losing myself in another promise." Alexander squeezed her hands gently. "I will not ask you to forget what you have been through. I only ask that you trust me. Let me prove to you that there is another way." Elena felt the weight of his words settle over her. She remembered the loneliness of giving birth alone, the strength she had found in herself, and the quiet assurance that she could stand on her own. But she also felt the stirring of something new. This was not a step toward weakness, but toward healing. Later that afternoon, Alexander invited her to his home. The air there was filled with warmth and quiet history. In the study, he revealed what he had kept hidden. "Elena, I have never told anyone this because he said it was not mine to know until now. My family has a foundation, a hospital network that spans countries. It is dedicated to medical care for those who cannot afford it. I never spoke of it because I wanted to build something for myself before sharing it with anyone." Elena listened, her eyes wide. Alexander continued, "I want you to be part of it, not as someone who stands beside me, but as someone who leads with me. Together, we can create something lasting." The truth settled between them. His heritage was not just wealth, but a legacy of care and compassion. It was a heritage that surpassed Marcus's empire of power and control. Elena felt her heart stir with a mixture of awe and hesitation. That evening, she sat alone by the window, Lily asleep in her arms. She thought of Marcus, the pain he had caused, and the choice before her. To open her heart again was to risk loss and embrace possibility. Alexander's proposal was more than an offer of marriage. It was an invitation to a new life, one built on trust and shared purpose. When Alexander returned to the room, she looked up at him. "I will marry you," she said softly. "We can build something worth the risk." Alexander's face broke into a quiet smile. He reached for her hand, pressing his lips to her knuckles. "Thank you, Elena. You have given me more than you know." But the moment of joy was shadowed by an unseen threat. Victoria Lang had learned of the proposal. Her lips curled into a cruel smile as she sent a letter without a signature to Elena's office. The contents were brief but chilling. "Beware of trust given too easily. Not all offers of love are what they seem." The letter arrived the following morning. Elena read it with a steady hand, though her heart fluttered uneasily. She showed it to Alexander. His face hardened. "Whoever sent this seeks to unsettle us," he said. "I will protect you." Elena nodded, though unease remained. She understood that her path was no longer hers alone. Choosing Alexander meant entering a life intertwined with his heritage and responsibilities, but also with dangers she could not yet see. Days passed, filled with preparations. Alexander began planning their engagement, seeking to make it a ceremony and declaration. Elena returned to her work at the hospital, her hands busy in care while her mind carried the weight of the future. One afternoon, Harriet visited. She brought news of whispers in the hospital, questions about Elena's choices, and her willingness to trust again. Harriet placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "Be careful," she said. "Love can be beautiful, but also treacherous." Elena appreciated the warning, though she did not let it sway her. She had learned to stand against storms. This was simply another one she would meet in time. The day of the proposal came under skies washed in soft light. Alexander took her to the hospital courtyard, where Lily played among fallen leaves. He spoke to her, without grandeur, asking her once more to be his partner in life and purpose. Elena said yes. The words carried between them with the weight of decision and hope. Alexander slipped a ring onto her finger, its design timeless yet straightforward. It was not the end of her journey, but the beginning of another. Yet somewhere in the shadows, Victoria watched. Her letter had been the first move in a game she was determined to finish. Her motives were not merely jealousy, but something darker. She would not let Elena and Alexander unite without a fight. Elena held Lily in her arms as the day faded. She did not know what awaited them, but she felt ready to face it for the first time since Marcus's betrayal. With Alexander beside her and the truth of his heritage revealed, she believed in the promise of a new beginning. The garden was still and golden as the sun set. Elena whispered to Lily, "We are stepping into something new, my love, a life built on trust, love, and courage." Alexander stood close, watching them. His voice was quiet but confident. "Together, we will face whatever comes." And as the last light fell, the shadows of the future gathered quietly, carrying with them both the promise of love and the threat of secrets yet to be revealed. The air in the city had taken on a brisk edge as autumn deepened. Leaves swirled along cobblestone streets, and the scent of wood smoke drifted from open hearths. For Elena, the days were filled with purpose and planning. The wedding she and Alexander envisioned was not simply a union of hearts, but a celebration of a future built on truth and trust. It was to be a testament to healing and renewal after the storms they had weathered. Preparations moved forward with careful detail. Invitations were sent to friends and family who had stood by them. The hospital courtyard was chosen for the ceremony, which held meaning for both of them. For Elena, it was where she had fought for her child and her independence. For Alexander, it was where he first confessed his heritage and intent to stand beside her. Clara had become a constant presence in Elena's life. She offered guidance in the legal matters that still lingered, especially the finalization of the divorce with Marcus. The court dates loomed, but Elena was determined to see them through before the wedding. Clara's voice was firm when she said, "We need this closed before you walk down that aisle." Elena agreed. She wanted no loose threads to bind her future. But not everyone welcomed their union. Rumors began to stir in the circles they moved in. Whispers of scandal, hidden motives, and Alexander's mysterious past. Elena ignored them, focusing instead on her hospital work and growing joy at the thought of marrying Alexander. Yet there was a shadow she could not deny. Victoria Lang had not been idle. Victoria and Marcus had met in secret more than once since their parting of ways. A shared resentment toward Elena tempered the anger between them. Victoria saw an opportunity in Marcus's bitterness, and Marcus, wounded by his failures, was willing to listen. They began to weave a plan. If they could disrupt the wedding, they could strike a blow against the life Elena had rebuilt. Victoria's voice was low and venomous when she spoke to Marcus. "This is our chance," he said, "to take back what she has taken from you." She nodded, her eyes glinting with malice. "We can ruin everything." Their plan was subtle at first: anonymous letters, veiled threats, whispers planted in the ears of those close to Elena and Alexander. They aimed to create doubt, to unsettle the bond between them. Victoria sent another unsigned letter to Elena, this time to the hospital administration, hinting at improprieties in Alexander's foundation. Marcus spread rumors in business, suggesting Alexander's wealth was tied to questionable deals. Elena read the letter one afternoon while she was working. Her hands trembled slightly, but she folded them without reply. Alexander noticed her silence later and took her hand. "Whatever doubts you feel, I am here," he said. "Nothing can change what I have chosen." She wanted to believe him, but the words of others began to creep into her mind. The wedding was drawing closer, and with each day, the stakes grew higher. Alexander remained steady, though she could see the strain in his eyes. He was determined to protect her, even as the shadows grew heavier around them. Clara worked tirelessly to finalize the divorce. Marcus resisted at every turn, filing motions that delayed the process. He pleaded quietly with Elena to see him one last time, to reconsider. But Elena was resolute. Her voice was clear when she told Clara, "I will not allow him to pull me back into that darkness." As the final court date approached, Alexander and Elena found themselves surrounded by friends who offered their support. Harriet was among them, her presence a steady reminder of what Elena had fought for. She touched Elena's shoulder and said, "Be strong, my dear. You have earned this happiness." The evening before the wedding, Alexander called Elena to the hospital courtyard. The garden was quiet, lit by soft lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. He took her hands in his voice steady. "Tomorrow, we stand before those we love and declare our future. No matter what comes, we will face it together." Elena nodded, her heart full of both joy and apprehension. She knew Victoria and Marcus would not rest quietly. She had felt the tension grow, the undercurrent of sabotage. Yet she refused to let it destroy what she had fought to build. On the morning of the wedding, the hospital courtyard was transformed. White roses lined the paths, and light streamed through a canopy of greenery. Guests gathered, their faces a mixture of joy and curiosity. Elena stood in the bridal suite with Clara and Harriet by her side. The air was thick with anticipation. Alexander arrived quietly, his presence grounding her. He took her hand, his eyes holding hers. They walked together to the courtyard, where music rose softly. The world seemed to hold its breath. But in the shadows, Victoria watched, her lips curled in a calculated smile. Marcus stood beside her, his expression unreadable. They had made their move. Theirs was not merely a protest, but a strategy. Victoria had arranged for a disruption to unfold at the ceremony's height. As Elena walked toward Alexander, a sudden commotion stirred near the entrance. Guests turned toward the sound. Marcus stepped forward, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Elena." The word was simple yet carried the weight of accusation. Victoria stepped closer, her presence deliberate. She began to speak, her voice sharp and clear. She accused Elena and Alexander of deception, of hiding truths. The crowd murmured, the serene beauty of the morning fracturing under tension. Alexander moved to Elena's side, his voice calm but firm. "This is not the time," he said quietly. "Let us speak later." Elena looked toward him, her heart racing. She had anticipated opposition, but not such a brazen confrontation. She took a deep breath, her voice steady. "Today is not for accusations. Today is for truth and for love." The ceremony continued despite the disruption, but the air was charged. Victoria and Marcus lingered at the crowd's edge, their eyes fixed on Elena and Alexander. Their plan had not fully unraveled, but they had made their mark. Doubt had been sown. The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged. Alexander and Elena stood hand in hand, their eyes locked in a silent promise. Around them, the garden seemed to breathe with the moment's joy, even as the shadow of opposition lingered. After the ceremony, Victoria approached with a cold smile. She whispered to Marcus that this was not over. He nodded, his expression grim. Elena stood with Alexander beneath the lanterns, Lily sleeping in her arms. She knew the path ahead would not be without challenges, but in his embrace she found the courage to face them. The wedding was not the end of their battle, but the beginning of a new chapter. And as they stepped forward together, Elena felt certain of one truth. Love was worth fighting for even when the world conspired against it. The morning of the wedding was wrapped in a golden haze, the kind that seemed to soften the edges of reality. Guests arrived in elegant attire, the air filled with roses and the soft hum of conversation. The hospital courtyard had been transformed into a place of magic. White silk-draped arches framed the aisle, and lanterns swayed gently above, casting a warm glow. The day promised celebration, but beneath it was the undercurrent of tension that neither Elena nor Alexander could ignore. Elena stood in the bridal suite, her gown flowing like liquid ivory. Clara adjusted the final details, her fingers steady but her expression serious. Harriet stood nearby, her eyes watching Elena with pride and caution. Elena drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This day was a union of hearts and a defiance of everything that had tried to break her. Outside, Alexander was waiting. His suit was immaculate, his expression calm, though his eyes betrayed anticipation. He had chosen to remain quiet in the face of Victoria and Marcus's schemes, believing their drama could not overshadow what they were building together. As the music began, Elena walked down the aisle with Lily in her arms. The guests rose, their faces reflecting awe and warmth. But not everyone was there to witness joy. Victoria stood at the crowd's edge, her eyes sharp and calculating. Marcus lingered beside her, his face a mixture of anger and regret. They had come with one purpose: to disrupt what they could not accept. The ceremony began with soft words of blessing. Alexander's voice was steady, promising Elena love and partnership. Elena responded with the same sincerity, her voice carrying through the courtyard. Lily stirred in her arms, her small fingers curling around Elena's dress. It seemed the world had fallen away for a moment, and only they remained. But then Victoria stepped forward. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. "Elena, you stand here surrounded by lies. This marriage is built on deception. Alexander's fortune is not what he claims. You have been misled." A murmur rose among the guests. Alexander took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "Victoria, this is not the place or time for accusations. Let us speak later in private." Victoria shook her head, her voice rising. "No, the truth must be spoken now. Everyone deserves to know." Marcus stepped beside her, adding weight to her words. "You cannot hide what is behind closed doors. Elena deserves the truth." Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. The serene beauty of the morning was fractured by confrontation. Elena stood still, her heart pounding. She looked to Alexander, who took her hand and nodded quietly. His presence was a shield against the storm. Elena lifted her chin and faced the crowd. "I will not let this moment be stolen. This day is ours. Whatever lies have been whispered will not define us. Alexander and I stand here because we chose each other." Her words carried a quiet power. Some guests nodded, others looked uncertain. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. She stepped closer, her voice sharp. "The truth will come out. You cannot escape it." The officiant, sensing the tension, spoke gently, urging calm. Alexander stepped forward, speaking directly to the gathered crowd. "Let today be about love and commitment. We will face whatever comes together." Despite his words, the disruption lingered. Victoria remained close, her gaze fixed on Elena. Marcus stood beside her, silent now, but his expression tense. They had made their stand. The question now was whether they could dismantle what had been built. The vows continued. Elena spoke with conviction, her voice steady even as her heart raced. Alexander's words were filled with sincerity and promise. The exchange of rings was met with soft applause, a fragile thread of joy threading through the tension. When Alexander pronounced them husband and wife, there was a collective breath, a release of emotion. Guests applauded, some cheering softly, others with hesitation. Elena and Alexander shared a quiet smile, their hands clasped tightly. The battle had not ended for them, but a victory had been claimed. Victoria stepped forward then, her presence commanding. She shouted accusations that rang over the crowd, speaking of lies, betrayal, and hidden motives. Security moved toward her, but Marcus placed a hand on her arm. "We will handle this," he said quietly. The commotion drew the attention of many guests. A few whispered among themselves, while others turned their gaze away, uncomfortable with the public spectacle. Harriet moved to Elena's side, offering steady support. Clara watched closely, ready to intervene if necessary. Victoria's words became sharper, a performance designed to wound. Marcus watched her closely, his own emotions unreadable. When security approached again, Victoria resisted, forcing them to remove her from the courtyard. Her last words carried over to the guests. "This is not the end. You will see the truth." The removal left a silence heavier than applause. Marcus lingered a moment longer before stepping away, disappearing into the crowd. His presence and the accusations left a mark that could not be erased. Elena turned to Alexander, her eyes searching his. He gave her a slight nod of reassurance. The moment was theirs again. They embraced, and Lily clung to them, a living symbol of their union. The ceremony continued with a quiet beauty. Friends and family gathered close, offering blessings and smiles. The wedding reception was filled with music and laughter, though the shadow of confrontation lingered in the minds of many. Later in the evening, Alexander spoke to Elena privately. He took her hand and said softly, "Whatever comes, we will face it together." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words. The wedding was not merely a union of two hearts, but a declaration that they would stand together against whatever storms lay ahead. As the night wore on, Victoria's presence remained a quiet memory of conflict. Marcus had vanished entirely, his absence both a relief and a mystery. Elena knew this confrontation was far from over. Victoria's determination suggested she would continue her fight, driven by motives Elena could not fully understand. The wedding night closed with a quiet promise. Alexander and Elena stood beneath the lantern light, Lily sleeping in their arms. Around them, the garden seemed to hold its breath, as if the world acknowledged their courage. For Elena, the day had been more than a celebration. It was a test of strength, love, and the ability to rise above betrayal. For Alexander, it was a vow that he would protect her and the life they were building together. But in the shadows, Victoria plotted still. Her voice carried in memory, "This is not the end." And somewhere deep in the night, the truth waited, patient and confident, ready to return when the time was right. The days after the wedding carried a strange mixture of joy and tension. The ceremony had been beautiful, a testament to Elena and Alexander's love. Yet the shadow of Victoria's confrontation lingered in those who had witnessed it. Rumors spread quietly through the city, whispers of scandal that refused to fade. For Elena, the victory of the wedding was only the beginning of another battle. Marcus Hale had disappeared from the public eye. Business circles noted his absence, and his silence became a subject of speculation. Elena learned from Clara privately that Marcus was fighting his own legal battles, struggling to maintain what remained of his empire. His pride would not allow him to surrender quietly, nor would Victoria Lang. Together, they continued to work against Elena and Alexander, though now from the shadows. For Alexander, the days were filled with effort to strengthen their foundation. He threw himself into the hospital work, ensuring that their union was also a union of purpose. Yet he could not ignore the unease that followed them. Elena sensed the quiet hostility that lingered in certain corners, the thinly veiled questions from acquaintances who had attended the wedding. Elena returned to her work with renewed determination. At the hospital, she was surrounded by life and healing. She worked with Harriet to expand the services offered to mothers and children, driven by a more profound sense of mission. The hospital became her sanctuary, a place where love and purpose met. But Marcus had not forgotten. One afternoon, Clara came to Elena with news that Marcus had filed a motion to revisit the divorce and request visitation rights for Lily. His lawyers argued that Elena had denied him the right to be part of his child's life. Clara assured her they had substantial grounds to refuse. Elena agreed, knowing she had fought too hard to lose her newfound peace. When the court date arrived, Elena faced Marcus in a tense hearing. Marcus spoke with controlled anger, his voice steady but laced with emotion. Elena said with calm conviction, laying out the truth of his betrayal and the pain he had caused. The judge ruled in her favor, granting her full custody of Lily. Marcus's protest was quiet but filled with a hollow defeat. In the days that followed, Marcus did not attempt to see Lily. Elena learned through her circle that he had lost major contracts and investors due to the scandals surrounding his divorce. His pride and ambition had become his undoing. Marcus had lost not only Elena, but also his empire in control and power. Victoria's fate was no kinder. Her attempts to undermine Elena and Alexander had drawn the attention of legal authorities. She faced charges of harassment and defamation, and her career began to crumble. Marcus's silence meant she was left to fight alone. Their alliance dissolved quietly, leaving her isolated and determined to find another way to strike. Elena found herself reflecting on the path that had led her here. She began publicly speaking about her journey, sharing her story with groups of mothers, women who had faced betrayal and loss. Her words carried power and authenticity, and her voice became one of inspiration. She spoke not of revenge, but strength, forgiveness, and the ability to rise again. Alexander supported her quietly, proud of the woman she had become. He knew their life together was being tested by outside forces and the weight of what they had endured. They had built something precious, but the cost had been high. Marcus, meanwhile, remained a shadow in their lives. Elena heard of him occasionally, through the whispers of mutual acquaintances. He had retreated from the world he once dominated, living in solitude. Clara told her he had written letters he never sent, confessions of regret and admissions of failure. Elena imagined him alone in his penthouse, surrounded by the ruins of his pride. One afternoon, Alexander found Elena in the garden courtyard. He held her hand gently, his eyes steady. "Elena, I know Marcus has been a ghost in your life, but you have given yourself to a future that is real. That is what matters." Elena nodded, her gaze soft. She thought of Marcus, not with anger now, but with pity. His story was a caution, a reminder of what it meant to lose oneself. She replied quietly, "I have forgiven him, not for him, but for me." Victoria's challenge had not vanished entirely. She continued to send anonymous threats to Elena's hospital and even to Alexander's foundation. Each one was a test of their resolve, but they faced them together, their unity strengthening with each trial. The public began to notice Elena's transformation. Articles appeared about her work with mothers and her courage in facing adversity. Her story became a beacon for others. She gave interviews, spoke at conferences, and welcomed attention not for herself, but for the causes she championed. Marcus heard of her speaking engagements through whispers in his shrinking circle. Each mention was a quiet dagger to his pride. Deep inside, he knew he had lost not only Elena, but also the chance to rewrite his story. One evening, he sent a letter addressed to Elena. She read it privately, the words a mixture of apology and confession. He spoke of his childhood, of the fears that had driven him, and of the moment he realized he had lost her forever. But he did not ask for her return. He admitted his failure. Elena kept the letter folded in her drawer. It was not a letter of reconciliation, but a closure. She knew there would be no return for Marcus, and that her path was with Alexander and Lily. Alexander noticed the letter when she showed it to him. He did not speak of it much, but he understood its significance. It was the end of a chapter, and with it came the freedom to build anew. The court of public opinion had sided quietly with Elena. Marcus became a cautionary tale of pride and betrayal. Victoria became a warning of ambition unchecked by conscience. Elena became something more than a woman who had endured. She became a symbol of resilience. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Elena and Alexander worked to strengthen their foundation and to expand the hospital's reach. Lily grew surrounded by love, laughter, and the quiet assurance of a safe home. Elena often reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the pain of loss and the power of forgiveness. She knew that redemption was not always possible for those who had betrayed her, but she also knew forgiveness was possible for herself. One afternoon, she spoke before a gathering of women who had faced hardship. She said, "Strength comes not from vengeance but from healing. Forgiveness is not for those who have wronged us, but for ourselves." The applause that followed was warm and unforced. Elena knew her words carried truth, not just for them, but for her own soul. Marcus never returned to challenge her. His absence became part of the story, a silent testimony to the cost of betrayal. Victoria faced her downfall alone, her voice fading from the world she had once tried to control. Elena moved forward with Alexander, their life a tapestry woven from both struggle and hope. They knew challenges would come, but they faced them together. Their union was imperfect but real, built on trust earned through trials. Elena would sometimes think of Marcus in quiet moments, not with bitterness, but understanding. He had lost his chance, but she had gained hers. Their story was one of consequences and the quiet strength of choosing to rise above them. The first light of dawn fell softly over the city as Elena stood at the window of her office at the hospital. Outside, the air was crisp and quiet, the streets still wrapped in early morning calm, and in her arms rested a mug of tea, warm against her palms, while her thoughts wandered over the years that had brought her to this moment. She thought of Marcus, the betrayal that had once shattered her world, and the strength it had taken to stand again. She thought of Victoria, the battles that had tried to undo her, and how every challenge had brought her closer to the truth of who she was. But most of all, she thought of Lily, her daughter, whose laughter had become the light that guided her through the darkness. The journey had not been easy. It had been filled with pain, confrontation, loss, and doubt. But it had also been filled with moments of courage, compassion, and love. Now, Elena felt a peace she had not known before, a quiet certainty that she was living a life built on her own terms. Alexander entered quietly, his footsteps soft against the floor. He looked at her with a warmth that made her heart steady. "Good morning," he said. Elena smiled. "Good morning." They stood together for a long moment in silence, sharing the quiet of the morning. Then Alexander spoke. "Today marks more than the passing of time. It marks the beginning of what we build together." Elena turned to him, her eyes reflecting both love and determination. "We have both been tested. We have both been changed, but we have found each other. That is enough." Their life together had become one of shared purpose. They had transformed Alexander's foundation into a network of hospitals for needy mothers and children. Elena's vision had become the heart of their mission, and her work had given her a renewed sense of self. The hospital had become more than a place of healing. It was a home for compassion, where women who had faced hardship could find care and hope. Elena often spent her days among patients, her presence a source of comfort. Alexander worked beside her, not as a partner who protected her from the world, but as one who helped her shape it. Lily grew up in this environment, surrounded by love and the knowledge that she was cherished. She was curious and bright, with a quiet strength that reminded Elena of her mother. Watching her daughter grow became one of Elena's greatest joys. One afternoon, they stood together in the courtyard, Lily playing at their feet. Alexander took Elena's hand. "I want you to know that everything we have built is because of you. You have given me more than I could have imagined." Elena squeezed his hand, a gentle smile on her lips. "And you have given me something I never thought I could have again: trust and a home." Their peace, however, was not without its trials. Victoria continued to linger at the edges of their lives, her name whispered in legal circles and the media. She had become a warning to Elena of what ambition without compassion could bring. Marcus remained silent, a ghost of the past whose presence was felt in the quiet moments of reflection. Elena chose not to dwell on them. Her life was forward-moving. She learned forgiveness was not about erasing the past, but freeing herself from it. She had found strength not in revenge, but in resilience. She began to speak more openly of her journey. She shared her story at conferences with women who had faced betrayal and hardship. Her words were not of vengeance, but of hope. She spoke of the power of compassion, finding strength in vulnerability and the courage to rebuild. Her story became a message carried beyond the walls of the hospital. It became a beacon for others. Women wrote to her, sharing their own stories of pain and renewal. She responded to them with care, knowing that her voice could inspire change. Alexander supported her quietly. He knew her voice was as powerful as her actions. Together, they continued to build the foundation, expanding its reach to remote regions, bringing care to places where hope had long been forgotten. One evening, As they were working late in the office, Elena found a letter on her desk. It was from Marcus. She opened it with careful hands. His words were heavy yet straightforward with regret. He spoke of his loneliness, the mistakes he could not undo, and the lessons he had learned too late. He did not ask for forgiveness. He only asked her to live fully, to embrace the life she deserved. Elena folded the letter and placed it in her drawer. It was a closure, and she did not need to speak aloud. It was proof that some journeys ended not in reconciliation, but in acceptance. Weeks later, Elena spoke at a conference on women and resilience. She told her audience, "Strength is not born from never falling, but rising every time we do. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the courage to free ourselves." Her words echoed long after she left the stage. They became part of her message to the world, not just about her healing, but the power each person holds to transform pain into purpose. At home, Alexander and Elena continued to build their life quietly. Lily laughed and played in the courtyard. Harriet visited often, and her presence reminded them of the long road they had traveled. Clara remained a trusted advisor and friend. Their love became a steady flame nourished by shared struggles and quiet victories. Elena knew there would be challenges ahead, but she faced them with a confidence born of survival and love. One morning, as she watched Lily play in the garden, she spoke softly to Alexander. "We have built something lasting, not because it was easy, but because we chose to keep going." Alexander took her hand and held it to his heart. "And we will keep going, together." Elena knew he was right. They had faced storms and had built something more substantial in their wake. Their story was no longer one of betrayal, but of renewal. The days passed, filled with work, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection. Elena often thought of Marcus. She felt no bitterness toward him anymore. Instead, she felt a deep understanding. His failure had been his own, and her triumph was hers alone. Victoria's attempts to disrupt their peace faded over time. Her voice was no longer heard in their world. Elena focused on what she had built: a life of purpose, a home of love, and a future that she chose for herself and Lily. On a sunny afternoon, Elena stood in the courtyard, Lily by her side. She looked out over the hospital gardens, feeling a quiet pride. They had come far, and the road ahead was theirs to walk. She turned to Alexander. "Thank you," she said, "for standing beside me, for building with me, for believing in us." He smiled and pulled her close. "The journey is ours together," he said, "always." As they stood there, the sun falling over them in warm light, Elena felt a profound certainty in her heart. They had learned that happiness was not in perfection, but in the choice to stand together, forgive, and keep building. In her heart, Elena carried a simple truth. Strength comes from within, love comes from choice, and life is what we make of it. Elena, Alexander, and Lily stepped forward into their new life, carrying the message of inner strength, the courage to forgive, and the promise of hope.